If you are a serious piano student, chances are you have struggled through at least one set of Preludes and Fugues by J.S. Bach. Bach wrote 48 sets of Preludes and Fugues, equally divided into two books called Well-Tempered Clavier. In each book, Bach explores all the keys from C major to C minor and all the way to B minor. So there are 24 Preludes and Fugues in each book of Well-Tempered Clavier, Book 1 and Book 2. I'll be honest with you, when I was little, I wanted to avoid these as much as possible. I just found them to be very, very difficult to memorize and just could not feel very connected to them musically. Nevertheless, audition repertoires and my own piano teachers demanded that I practice these diligently and memorize them. And these are intellectually challenging pieces of music which require at least a little bit of theoretical knowledge and compositional technique. So to help those of you lost, confused, and struggling through these right now, I picked out the C-sharp major fugue from Well-Tempered Clavier Book 1 by J.S. Bach, and I'll teach it to several different levels of piano playing. It'll involve a little bit of music theory, but hopefully only to the extent that it'll actually help you understand and play it better. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I really hope that you find joy in playing a fugue as I did, especially after learning about the compositional process on a deeper level. Without further ado, let's get started. At the most basic level, a fugue is a piece of music written for two or more voices, where the voices imitate the main subject. This imitative compositional technique comes from vocal works from the pre-Baroque period, but fugue as an instrumental genre developed and reached its height by Johann Sebastian Bach with his Well-Tempered Clavier and the Art of Fugue. The subject can be expanded, contracted, flipped upside down, and of course there are musical terms for these, but we can save the technical talk for another video. So let's listen to a little bit of the beginning. So as you can hear, it's a very light and joyful fugue in three voices. Its three voices have its own line and they are independent of each other. So unlike the texture of classical sonatas by Mozart, for example, where there's one melody that gets accompanied by chords or Alberti bass, these are independent voices which weave in and out of each other. The most important thing about fugues as a genre is that its texture is polyphonic, and a fugue is primarily occupied with developing a particular musical idea through various harmonies and keys. The challenging part, of course, for us pianists is to play many independent lines with clarity while we have only two hands. Let's go back and hear the subject again. First, the soprano states the subject. This is answered by the alto. And now the bass. And I will now let you hear how each line continues. Alto, now the bass. And when all of the soprano, alto, and bass lines are put together, it's a harmonious conversation. The opening section of a fugue, where each voice has presented the subject once, is called the exposition. And usually an episode takes us into some kind of harmonic sequence. And in this little episode, Bach takes us into D sharp minor, and the subject appears in the bass. And after another episode, which is actually the circle of fifth progression, you will hear the subject coming in the alto voice. Sometimes Bach will use fragments of the subject in episodes, and this adds a little bit of playfulness. Usually the alto voice between the high range of soprano and the deep bass is naturally harder to bring out. So you probably need to play a little bit louder than you think you need to. At the beginner level, remember that a fugue may have 3, 4, or even 5 independent lines that should be projected with clarity. It's like many people having a debate on one subject, and the other voices know how to respect each other and know when to speak or listen. Clarity of lines is the most important, and you must practice each line in isolation. Once you're comfortable with projecting the subject in each line, then you can start paying attention to what else is going on around the subject. While the subject is being played by one voice, the other voices are adding their own line. Not in any disruptive way, but in a harmonious way that complements the main idea. And if this other line is heard again and again along with the subject, we call it the counter subject. And it turns out in this fugue we have 2 counter subjects. Bach was a mastermind in composing fugues, so he knew even before he wrote everything down what kind of counter subjects would work with his subject so that the result is harmonious. Skip a little ahead to the next entrance of the subject. At measure 10, you will hear the subject in the soprano line, counter subject number 1 in the alto, and counter subject 2 in the bass. So in a fugue like this with 3 voices, there are 3 distinct lines that you should pay attention to and hear individually. Are we actually capable of doing that? So brain researchers and psychologists have repeatedly found that our brains are actually not capable of paying attention to 2 things equally, let alone 3. So what your brain actually does is to switch back and forth between the things that require your attention. So when we play a fugue, we have to prioritize what is the most important thing to hear and practice accordingly by layering your dynamics among the voices. But be sure to practice carrying through a line also without being disrupted by any kind of physical inconvenience. One line, quite often the alto, may need to be split between the 2 hands or take awkward fingerings. So these are all things to practice for. As an intermediate student, you should be familiar with the concept of reoccurring counter subjects and strive to listen to not just the main subject but to 3 independent lines creating harmonious sounds and weaving in and out of each other. Preludes and fugues by Bach get the notion of being didactic and dry. And for a good reason, because Bach did write these as a pedagogical tool for his students. It is a study of harmony, and a piece of fugue is a deep exploration of a single idea. But that does not mean that it's boring and without emotions. Just like any other music that we play, we should think about what is the emotional quality that this music is trying to communicate. Overall, the subject has a dance-like quality. It starts with a pickup, so be sure to keep the rhythm light, and it shouldn't end with an accent just because it happens on a downbeat. So not like this. As an advanced student with some experience of playing fugues, you can think about the character of the subject and how to shape it. Because even if you have the best argument in a debate, how you say it matters greatly. In this episode, the left hand's bass is important because it outlines the harmonic movement. Play with a little more weight, which usually means play just a hair longer to make it more audible. And even in episodes where there's no main subject being played, I think you can highlight the interplay between two voices. Here, the alto line echoes the soprano line. Even though it's just one hand playing, by varying the dynamics between the two lines and with clear articulation, you can hear the two voices interacting with each other. Let me play it as though it's just one line. This is just a small trick. Whenever the subject sort of sneaks in from a similar rhythmic movement, I give it the tiniest accent on the first note. And when you're in the minor mode, you may want to deepen your voice in your left hand to give it some contrast. This is a similar interplay between the top two voices as in the previous episode. As an advanced student, you should aim to notice interactions that go on between the voices, as well as the harmonies that they create. It's like hearing vertically and horizontally at the same time. It's tough. And fugues in general tend to sound like they just go on and on because there are rarely any breaks. So when a section closes harmonically, acknowledge it before going on, even if it's just a small cadence. There is sort of a voice exchange going. Even though it's not the exact imitation, what was just heard in the soprano voice, it's imitated in the alto. And similarly, what was heard at measure 20 in the bass is imitated in the soprano voice in the next bar. This is towards the end. There is a similar voice exchange between the alto and soprano. Because both voices are within a narrow range of register, it's easy to sound like just one line. Practicing with two hands helps you hear and play the two lines more distinctively. So, in a fugue, With rather strict rules of composition and counterpoint, a set number of voices play their independent line with clarity and without ever blurring the main idea. They follow and imitate each other, but also argue and oppose one another. And when they do, they always come back to meet at a proper place before going on. And I don't know about you, but that's starting to sound like a life lesson that we can all learn from. I hope you enjoyed the video, and here's the full performance of C-sharp major fugue from Well-Tempered Clavier Book 1 by Johann Sebastian Bach.